The cryptocurrencies have not had a good start to 2022. And of course, a lot of people are concerned about the concept of a crypto winter that might hit again like we saw in 2017. Natalie Brunell is the host of the Coin Stories podcast. She is a Bitcoin educator, and she travels the world educating the audience about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. She has her own podcast where she interviews a lot of prominent investors and people in the crypto space. So she has an excellent pulse on the entire industry and where she thinks cryptocurrencies are headed. Welcome to the show, Natalie. Great to see you on Kitco.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Looking forward to it as well. Let's start with the Bitcoin market price action. You've spoken to technical analysts, investors, philosophers, Bitcoin skeptics, the whole range of people. What is some of the sentiment that you like to share with us? Sort of the consensus. Is there even a consensus, or is there just a broad range of where prices are headed?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting couple of weeks, right? I've seen both bullishness and bearishness on Twitter, which makes Bitcoin Twitter always really, really fun. But look, I am one of the Bitcoin bulls. I actually do think that we're going to see a new all-time high price. And why do I feel that way? Well, because the Fed's going to have a very difficult time tightening into a slowing economy and wanting to prevent a recession, especially in a midterm election year. So I think that we actually could see some very strong price rallies in the near future as the Fed is forced to loosen as opposed to tighten. And I know that they still have these rate hikes planned, but look, just talking about them spooked the market enough. We had that big equity sell-off last month. I think we hit a bottom. I think we're going to have a nice, possibly a melt-up rally. And I think Bitcoin will see new highs potentially. But if we do continue to chop along, I really think it's because of the bigger picture, the inflationary environment we're in, that the Fed is trying to control. But really, I mean, it's chasing its tail at this point. The Fed is sort of chasing its tail.
People have been telling me that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies at large, but in particular, Bitcoin has been tracking tech stocks very closely. So it's basically a leverage play on, let's say, the QQQ, which is the ETF that tracks the top 100 NASDAQ companies. Is that a sentiment you agree with? Is that the way you perceive Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin just a way to leverage your bets on tech companies?
Look, I view Bitcoin as an insurance policy where, the Fed right now is continuing to debase the currency and they're continuing to money print and they're blowing up this everything bubble. And Bitcoin is the nice insurance policy. And it's this amazing technology network that I think will eventually be the future monetary standard. However, yes, at least in the last 2 years, I think Bitcoin has largely been driven by liquidity, just like equity. So we've seen a correlation, but I think in the long run, this will decouple because Bitcoin is something that can't be manipulated, that can't be debased. And we have a disinflationary monetary policy. And I think the Fed is trying to do what it can, but we're running into a situation where people are starting to recognize the fact that the Fed has lost its credibility. And you want to move in the direction of inflation or this bubble where we have such a ridiculous debt to GDP ratio. The Warren, Buffett indicator is off the charts. I mean, this is some really scary times to possibly be investing in equities. Whereas again, Bitcoin cannot be manipulated, even if it does suffer some price corrections or we suffer through a winter. In the long run, I believe Bitcoin's going to be the winner.
All right, well, we'll circle back on the thesis for investing in Bitcoin in just a minute, but let's not tease the audience any further. Let's not keep them hanging. What is your price outlook on Bitcoin this year? You mentioned that you're probably more bullish than some of the guests you've had on your own show. So what do you think?
Yeah, I really do think that we're going to see a new all-time high. My hope is that we hit the six figures, but I think one of the things that has been holding us back is not having that spot ETF. And I don't know if we're going to be ready to pass that this year. I do think, though, that with more liquidity in the market, especially given, midterms coming up, and again, the government trying to prevent a recession, I do think that's going to drive Bitcoin's price up. I also think that every time an institution comes in, the way we had, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy or Tesla, putting it on its balance sheet, that encourages more institutional adoption and sort of the big whales to come in. So I think everything, fundamentally is strong for Bitcoin. We have geopolitical issues right now in Eastern Europe, two countries, Kazakhstan and Russia, which have two of the highest levels of hash rate, and we're still at all-time high levels of hash rate. We have more addresses than ever. I mean, all the fundamentals, again, are very strong for this network. But right now, I think the Fed's inflationary situation is making it difficult for it to ascend to those new highs. But I do think that that's going to change.
You brought up hash rate. So bring up a chart that I'll show the audience in post. Now, the hash rate and Bitcoin price, they've been historically correlated very closely with each other. Recently, and I mean recently in the last 3 months, since November, they've diverged. So the hash rate, as you mentioned, has continuously gone up due to a number of factors, but the Bitcoin price has fallen. Why do you think that's happened?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that right now Bitcoin is responding just like equities did to what's happening with inflation and the threat of tightening. But because you're right, we've normally been correlated with the hash rate. The hash rate is really, really strong. There's so much processing power on the network. I think that we're really due for a really big, strong rally with potentially new price highs. But we got to catch up right now in terms of just liquidity and demand in the market, which that's the one thing that's missing. But I again think that that's going to change.
So inflation, you've mentioned that inflation is a problem. Am I misquoting you? You said that it was a problem. Is it a problem, Natalie?
I think inflation is the number one problem that Americans are facing right now. And I think most of them don't realize how bad it is, don't understand what causes it. And they think probably that there's going to be some solution, that right now this is just inflation at 7% because of our response to the pandemic, and we're still coming out and our economy is going to regain its strength. Well, actually, inflation has been happening for the last 2 decades. We have been stimulating artificially, lowering interest rates and stimulating the economy for the last 2 decades since the last financial crisis. And I just think, the more that we continue to go down this path of irresponsible monetary policy, which basically just benefits the few at the expense of the many, we're going to see more social pressure exerted on everyday people because they can't afford the things that were once easier to afford, right? Everything from housing to college education to gas to grocery bills. I mean, this places a lot of pressure on people, especially the middle class and the low income earners. And I think that this is what drives a lot of the wealth inequality and the frustration and the civil unrest, because people feel like they're left behind. And what we're not connecting the dots with, at least in mainstream media and a lot of the, in our schools, we're not connecting the dots with how our money system works, what money printing does, how it functions, how it benefits corporations and the rich at the expense of the people who are the fabric of this country, the middle class. And so for me, I'm really passionate about this because my family came here from a country where they suffered communism. My family came from Eastern Europe. They wanted to come to a country of freedom and opportunity. They wanted the American dream, and the American dream shouldn't be so hard to achieve. You should be able to earn your money and put it away in a place where it's not just going to be sucked out of the value's just going to be sucked from it. Right. Yeah. So that's why I'm passionate about Bitcoin, because I think it addresses that very core problem, which is inflation.
Okay. How does Bitcoin fix inflation? Again, just to play devil's advocate now, we've had inflation rising consistently over the last couple of months. Bitcoin's price has been following. I've seen you address this on your Twitter. You've defended your thesis against skeptics that have mentioned exactly that. Well, look, Natalie, the price has gone down. Therefore, it's not an inflation hedge. How do you respond?
Yeah, well, so I say zoom out and look at the last 10-year performance of Bitcoin, which has surged more than 500,000% as opposed to most other asset and monetary classes. I actually think it's been a great inflation hedge. And I wish that I knew about Bitcoin sooner because, again, until I learned about Bitcoin, I didn't really understand some of the fundamental problems in our society and how they were related to our monetary system. And I think that the issue is that, our money is being debased and someone has control of the money printer, whereas with Bitcoin, no one has control of the money printer. There is no Federal Reserve. There's no president. There's no CEO of a corporation. It's a completely distributed young computer network that is powerful and decentralized, and the asset is scarce, unlike our dollar bills here in the US. So I'm really excited about it, and I do think that it will solve that problem.
Okay. Bitcoin is probably the solution to inflation. A lot of people would agree with that statement, but let's talk about Bitcoin as a currency, because right now you and I are being paid in fiat currencies for our regular jobs. We don't have yet the option to pay for everything in our lives with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. Maybe that's coming in the future. We'll talk about that. Some people, though, are opting for that right now. Some athletes, for example, I'm reading this article, Odell Beckham Jr. from the Rams, NFL player. This is you're smiling already. I think you know where I'm going with this. So he signed a deal worth about $750,000 in Bitcoin. At the time, Bitcoin was worth about $64,000. It's worth about $40,000 today. But anyway, today the deal is worth about $412,000. He's going to be taxed $750,000, which is the original deal, which means he's netting around $35,000. People are looking at this story as a cautionary tale and saying, yeah, you know what? I'm having second thoughts about getting paid in Bitcoin now, because I don't want to be taxed on what Bitcoin is today and then 6 months later have it fall 50% and only net half of that, right? What's your response to that argument?
Yeah, well, the Bitcoin bears are not going to like my answer, but
Okay.
I think when that sum turns out to be worth millions and millions of dollars, because again, we zoom out and this is a
Yeah.
long-term investment, a long time horizon, not a short-term horizon, then I think he's going to be very happy with it. Look, I see Bitcoin as the ultimate store of value and savings technology. I do get very excited about the idea of, especially in foreign countries and in governments where inflation is even higher and a bigger problem than here in the US, that it is serving as a medium of exchange and people are able to transact, and it was legalized as tender in places like El Salvador. However, here in the US, where our currency is relatively stable in the short term, but depreciating over the long term, the purchasing power is collapsing. I think that Bitcoin is the ultimate store of value because yes, it's volatile in the short term, but over the long run, the logarithmic chart, you zoom out and you see this beautiful upwards trend where it's gaining value, especially as we have the halvings and fewer Bitcoin are enter into circulation. And so yes, it might be a little painful right now, that paycheck that he's getting, but I say wait 4 years and he's going to be really happy.
All right. Well, let's assume, let's follow up with him in 4 years. I'm sure he'll be happy, or maybe not. Let's assume that you're right and the price continues to grow exponentially like it has been since the start of the early 2010s when Bitcoin was first incepted. What is your thesis around Bitcoin reaching, you mentioned, millions of dollars in the distant future? Do we need to see much higher rates of adoption? Do we need to see Bitcoin universally accepted as a currency? Do we need to see Bitcoin adopted by governments all around the world, not just El Salvador? We'll talk about that. What needs to happen, Natalie, before that vision of $1 million Bitcoin can be realized?
Yeah, so we need everyone to get on the Bitcoin standard, from institutions to the regular retail investors. And the only way to make that happen is to really help them to understand the current environment, the current monetary system, and what's broken with it. That's why I do what I do. That's why I'm passionate about it. Because right now, I think the Fed, the government, has backed itself into a corner, right? We all can probably understand why they had to stimulate the economy, but we've allowed this bubble to grow so big where, again, it's exerting pressure on the people who need money the most, who need to be able to save the most, and then they're having a difficult time affording things. Well, which way does the Fed go? Do they hike rates and start a recession and crush the markets? Or do they keep printing and debasing the currency? Well, both hurt people, right? They hurt the people that are in the middle and at the bottom the most. And we have a solution now, sort of this escape hatch and an option out that's completely peaceful, and it's based on technology. I think that that's so exciting and it's full of hope. And if we could just educate people that there's this parallel system that exists that's more accessible, that allows us to rebuild our financial order in possibly a more fair way that's not manipulated or controlled by any authority, that's really exciting to me. But it's just incumbent upon us to make people aware of the problem. So where do I see the future going? I see more and more adoption as people learn this problem. And as, again, the Fed and the government have no way to go if they keep printing inflation, if they taper, crash. So which way do they go? And I think you don't have to worry about it with Bitcoin.
How will they adopt Bitcoin? You mentioned that adoption rates will go up. In what capacity will people adopt Bitcoin? Is it as an investment, as a store of value, just somewhere in their Bitcoin wallet, Bitcoin vault, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, or perhaps as a unit of account in their everyday lives? How will Bitcoin be used maybe 10, 15 years from now, Natalie?
Well, 10, 15 years, I definitely see it potentially being a unit of account and a global reserve currency. I do. I think the first steps will be more countries legalize it as tender. We already see bills here in the US put forth by some senators saying, hey, let's make Bitcoin legal tender in a couple of states. I don't think we're there just yet. I think eventually we'll have a spot ETF. We see other countries have already set a precedent, but slowly but surely, I think both individuals as well as institutions and corporations will get on board and put at least part of their balance sheets, part of their savings into Bitcoin, seeing the value and understanding it. And look, we're already seeing the avenues, right? We see banks talking about it, Fidelity saying it's better than gold. There are institutions coming on board. It's just slowly but surely happening. It's all inevitable in our minds in the Bitcoin world. But things take time. We're basically trying to rebuild a financial system. And this is one that has had a huge monopoly over corporations and over the currency for so long. It's going to take time to educate educate people and help them get on board, I think.
Speaking of educating people, I know you've probably gotten comments like this on your own podcast and on your own Twitter. I get comments like this all the time on my show. Every time I talk about Bitcoin, people say, David, why are you talking about Bitcoin? It's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, look what you and I are doing right now, Natalie. We're talking about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the adoption rate, you said, is incumbent on people believing in Bitcoin and adopting it. Basically, they're saying, David, why are you pumping it up? It's a Ponzi scheme. Without people like you pumping it up, the market's just going to go down because the entire thing is based on hope. There's no substance, there's no intrinsic value. It's just a bunch of people hyping up the market until the market eventually collapses. I think that's one of Peter Schiff's arguments, actually. You had him on twice. Anyway, how would you respond to that? I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, is that Peter Schiff in your ear? Look, I think that there's a lot of value and power in a decentralized computer network that represents a completely scarce asset that, again, no one can control, manipulate. I see so much value in it that I see it as like a monetary version of the internet. Would you say the internet has no value because you can't really touch and feel it? I think that that's just a ridiculous statement. I think our current system is a Ponzi scheme. You know, you hear on Twitter right now a statement that I really relate to, which is just this idea of you can't taper a Ponzi scheme. You have to keep blowing up the bubble because otherwise it all comes tumbling down. And again, with Bitcoin, that doesn't exist. It has this beautifully mathematically perfect software protocol. It's essentially equations, it's math, and it is doing its job, and it keeps puttering along and growing every single year. And yes, again, short-term volatile, but zoom out and look at the strength of the network, how quickly it's growing. It's growing at a speed faster than the internet was being adopted in the 90s. And the price is going along with it. And every 4 years, there's going to be fewer and fewer Bitcoin that are mined. And I just think, like, what an incredible time to get on board with a technology network that's trying to solve one of the biggest problems in our country, which is the wealth inequality that comes from inflation and currency debasement.
What are some of the challenges right now that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are facing in terms of gaining traction and adoptability? So not everybody in the world has adopted Bitcoin. I think TikTok took like 5 years to reach 1 billion users. We're not at 1 billion users yet for Bitcoin. What's it going to take for us, Natalie, to get to 1 billion users in Bitcoin? What needs to happen?
Yeah, so actually the technical analysts that I've spoken with say that the numbers indicate that we should hit 1 billion users by 2025. So we're not that far off. I think it's going to take, again, some educational, just resources. They're all out there, but it takes time to educate the masses because this is something, Bitcoin's not something that they talk about every single day on mainstream media. And I think that as more institutions come on board, that's obviously going to help. People who have influence will help onboard people onto the Bitcoin standard. And I just think that we just really need to get out there and help people understand what this network is, what it's all about, the problems that it fixes, and how it's a savings account, a savings technology they should look at with a low time preference and thinking about their future and how they're going to afford it. But I think it's going to come on. I mean, we also need more avenues. We need a spot ETF. The fact that has not come on board, I think, is really holding the price back. But I do think that there are changes. I'm very bullish on some of the regulatory developments that are happening in Washington. There are hearings happening. There are groups within our space in Bitcoin who are trying to educate the politicians to make sure they make the right decisions. I'm sure we'll have more and more politicians, voted in who are Bitcoiners, who carry Bitcoin on their, on their bank books, as well as.
Are you foreshadowing, Natalie? Are you going to run for office? Is that what you're alluding to?
No, I think much more can be done with social media and with me just speaking to the public as opposed to within an establishment that has some gridlock. But I applaud the people who are pro Bitcoin, who are getting out there and trying to make the laws happen that really, regulate the space in a smart way that doesn't take away from technological innovation and from the capitalism that naturally exists within this space. Because I think crypto is one of the most capitalistic industries that exist right now. And the more regulation and the more red tape and the more they try to stifle it and control it, the worse off we are. I'm a big proponent of freedom and capitalism and self-determination, which are such fundamental principles for Bitcoin as well.
Do you think because DeFi is expanding so quickly and there's so many new protocols and projects coming online that maybe capital is going into that space and not so much into Bitcoin, which many see as just a store of value?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that this space is just still so new, and I do worry about some of the venture capital backed projects that involve other cryptocurrencies. I always, warn people that Bitcoin is not the same as crypto, and you really have to do the work to really understand the different monetary policies and whether there's any, group or centralized entity that's behind them and who's benefiting from maybe pre-mines and things like that. But that gets really complicated in the weeds. I like to focus on Bitcoin because, again, it fixes a problem. That problem we have to educate people on, and I'm very bullish on what's going to happen in the long run. I don't know what to say about all the other DeFi platforms as regulation comes, as the SEC maybe signifies that these other projects and tokens are securities. This is the wild, wild west in some ways, but I think Bitcoin has established dominance. It's established itself as the monetary standard in terms of technology, and for a future that could serve as a global reserve currency, that could serve as legal tender in countries like El Salvador. So I'm really excited about Bitcoin, very uncertain about all the others.
It is the Wild Wild West, but every time that's a problem. Every time, Natalie, a sheriff comes into town and tries to regulate things, the price takes a hit. So it's difficult to transition from the Wild Wild West into a more civilized society, so to speak, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. We've still got obstacles to go. That's why I think it's so important to educate politicians. We see so many of them coming out with misinformation, or, they come out and they latch on to myths surrounding Bitcoin. And it just shows
What's
that we have more
myth?
work. Oh, just that it's destroying the planet. I think that one, it's been debunked so many times. It's very frustrating when you hear that from politicians who are then taking private jets. So I think a lot of work has to be done to educate, the legislators and the lawmakers on how mining works. And as we have more Bitcoiner politicians, I think that will change. But, I think this is the direction we're going in. You can only deny it for so long.
Yeah, I think if the planet gets destroyed by Bitcoin, we wouldn't need Bitcoin to begin with anyway. So I guess that evens itself out. Yeah, by that point, we'll all be, bartering with food or whatnot. What's your favorite crypto, Natalie? If you had to pick one.
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin? Okay.
I'm a Bitcoiner.
Do you like Ethereum, the second biggest one?
No, I'm not. I'm not a fan personally. I believe in free markets, and I believe that some people will be able to, increase their bags with some of these other cryptocurrencies, and a lot of people also lose money. And I wish people all the best in their crypto casinos, but I'm sticking with Bitcoin, even if it performs not the way I want it to in the short run. I'm really happy with the performance in the long run and the potential.
Okay, so you're not enticed by the prospect of leverage. You're not. It doesn't allure you. The sexiness of 8, potentially 20 times returns in 3 months. We saw that with a bunch of new projects this year.
I stick to Bitcoin. I really do. I guess I'm playing it safe. People see Bitcoin as super risky. I think I'm actually taking the least risky, the super safe bet by not gambling on any other.
It is one of the more unvolatile coins out there. I mean, it's one of the most volatile assets in the world, but still compared to other projects, you're right. It's still relatively less risky. Well, how do you feel about stablecoins? Things tied to the US dollar or other currencies. Is that something that you would, let's say you convert an X percentage of your US dollar holdings into stablecoins, and then you can just generate yield on that. Is that something that you might be interested in?
Well, look, I can see why that's super attractive, right? Because you put your money in Chase and get 0.002% interest, and then some of these platforms are offering like 9 to 17% on stablecoins. Yeah. But I think that the industry is going to have a lot more oversight, and there's going to be some regulatory, obstacles that it's going to face. Because look, for many politicians, it sort of threatens the dollar, right? And they're trying to create their own central bank digital currencies, which I am not for at all. I think Bitcoin is one of the things that will fix that issue, and the surveillance and sort of the control that central bank digital currencies will bring. So I'm not sure what will happen with the market. I think that the stable coin market is going to grow. It definitely needs more regulation. But again, I just stick with Bitcoin. So I don't worry too much about other sides of the industry that may or may not have more obstacles.
Well, let's talk about some things that might keep you up at night. And I'm talking about the economy now, Natalie. I'm talking about some of the biggest doomsday predictions you've heard on your own show. What have people been telling you that might scare you? I don't know if they do, but let's suppose it does. What are some of the scariest doomsday predictions you've heard so far?
Yeah, sure. Well, so everyone from, Peter Schiff to David Hunter, who I admire and respect very much. There's a lot of people out there who are predicting a massive bust. And we are so leveraged. We mentioned it, a little bit earlier. It's an incredible debt to GDP ratio right now. We have so much excess and leverage in the system. And at some point, you got to think like this has to wash out, right? We can't have zero interest rates and low interest rates forever. Something is going to change. But if the bubble were to pop, that doesn't look very good right now because of just how much debt there is in the system that would need to be cleansed. And so that crash would be very, very painful. However, we've seen, crashes do happen from 2000 to 2009 to we saw temporarily in March that they just initiate the money printer every time this happens. And so every time that we print more money and stimulate the economy, it leads to debasing the currency. So look, I think that it actually is very possible that we have this massive unwinding. We saw a little hint of it, I think, in January when the equities had this sell-off at just the mere threat of a rate hike. And I think the Fed at some point will have to do something. Now, how badly will it pop the bubble before they initiate money printing again? Look, all of this is headed in the same direction. They can't allow the economy to just fail and collapse. They have to pump in more liquidity. What does that mean? Well, it's a great value proposition for why you need Bitcoin because they can't manipulate, they can't inflate Bitcoin. Will the price take a hit in the circumstance of a massive crash? Absolutely. But it never goes to zero. It never just disappears and dies. I know a lot of people were saying, oh, Bitcoin's dead in January. It's crashing harder than the traditional markets. Well, it's very resilient. It's already back in the 40s. And I'm very bullish on this year and very bullish on the long term because as the Fed, as the government, as governments around the world, central banks around the world show the populations that they're going to continue to debase the currency at the expense of basically the average working person, people are going to start to figure it out and opt out into this parallel system that is Bitcoin. And that is why I'm so hopeful about the future, because I think it allows us to rebuild an economy based on price signals, based on real interest rates, based on value, based on supply and demand, which honestly is something we haven't had for a long time. You said that the Fed can't let markets crash and they have to print money again. Well, that's assuming they care, Natalie. That's assuming they care about the markets and the economy and they'll have to do something to fix it. Okay, so Bitcoin is the answer. That's where you're hiding when the markets crash. Let's say they do. That's where you're putting most of your capital. Yeah, so especially when the market takes a dip, it's a great buying opportunity because again, I see in 4, 6, 8 years, I see these corrections. It's almost the best opportunity for you to increase your accumulation and the level of the amount of Bitcoin that you have. So it can be painful again in the short term. And I never tell people to invest what they need to spend in the next year or say few years in Bitcoin. I see this as that long-term bet, the long-term investment, the insurance policy against the central banks and their fiscal irresponsibility. I believe that what they've been doing has been very irresponsible. And I think that what's great about Bitcoin too is it really allows you to start thinking about the future again. I think, I'm a millennial and there are a lot of millennials out there who are just stressed about the future. They're like, I can't afford a house like my parents could. I can't afford this. I can't afford that. I can't have kids. Well, with Bitcoin, thinking about the fact that my money will probably increase in value 2 times, 5-fold, 10-fold, who knows, infinite potential, I can finally plan for a future. And that feels really good to me. I know why millennials can't afford those things because they lost all their money in Shiba Inu and GameStop when it went down. They didn't buy Bitcoin. Because they didn't put it in Bitcoin. Yeah, they put it in Bitcoin. Okay. Listen, Natalie, how much Bitcoin should I buy? Let's say I have, 100% of my allocation. Out of that, what percentage of my money should go into Bitcoin? This is so funny. I actually asked a technical analyst, like, if I give you $5 million, how much would you put in Bitcoin? I promise you I'm not stealing your questions. Okay, well, he said 5.2 million. You want to put it all and take out some money. Look, I'm a huge proponent of Bitcoin. If you have, say, 100,000, $1 million, and you don't need to spend that for 4 years, I would put all of it into Bitcoin, but that's just what I would do. I'm very bullish on it. So here's a question I ask people that see Bitcoin as a store of value. Okay, Natalie, let's say you put all your money in Bitcoin. Well, today, you'll make more money after this, but let's say you put all your savings today into Bitcoin. Would you feel comfortable leaving it in a wallet, a cold wallet somewhere, and just not touching it for 20, 25 years or 30 years until eventually one day you come out of retirement, you'll be confident that that account has grown tremendously in value. You can't trade it, you can't touch it, just leave it there for 30 years. Would you be comfortable doing that? I would. In fact, I do that. There's Bitcoin that I don't think I'll ever sell. I don't think that I would ever sell it because I want it for my future. I want it to hand to my children someday. Is it an investment if you don't sell it? Of course. course. It's a savings account. You can borrow against it someday. So we're envisioning a future where Bitcoin is worth a lot.
Okay, all right. I don't know if I want to be a part of that future. That sounds scary and promising at the same time. Mostly because we haven't seen what that looks like. But one country has seen what that's starting to look like, and that's El Salvador. They're doing some really cool things with Bitcoin. I believe we had Max Kaiser on the show. He was speaking to my colleague Michelle McCory, and he was telling us about how in El Salvador, where he's currently based, people are actually buying their fruits and their vegetables and their coffee with Bitcoin. There's about 4 million wallets activated already. The country, as you know, airdropped about a large chunk of a large percentage of their treasury into Bitcoin. You're going there next month, right? What kinds of things are you expecting to learn from your visit?
Look, I'm so excited to go there. I think that it's so incredible and progressive of the president to adopt the Bitcoin standard and to see a future with a currency that he can never manipulate, that he can never expand the quantity of, and just to see it as this powerful network that could help, bring the living standards up in his country a significant amount. And he's taking on a huge risk in terms of the short-term volatility because people in his country, many of them still don't understand the asset. And they are, I think, transacting in something that right now can drop 20, 50%, which is a little bit scary. But again, think about the long term. If this bet pays off, this is an incredible opportunity for El Salvador. They're already, sparking so much tourism and attention and investment in the country. The Bitcoin bonds, the volcano bonds are going to be released, I believe, this month. So I'm just really excited to see how this is all playing out in the country. I would love to meet President Bukele and interview him and talk to him a little bit about how this is developing. Right? Yeah, out of McDonald's, because he's working there right now. He's been buying the dip. I mean, it's incredible, right? I mean, think about the time that we're in. We see a president of a country adopt Bitcoin, and he's tweeting that he works at McDonald's when the price dips, and then he tweets about buying the dip on his mobile phone. I mean, crazy times, but I think it's powerful. It shows that, times are changing. We're moving in the direction of a new monetary world based on technology. And I'm excited to see what Bitcoin Beach is like. I'm going to talk to Max and Stacy there. I'm going to produce videos with Swan Bitcoin, which is going to be super exciting. And I'll report back.
Okay, well, I'd love to have you back and report back to us and what you find. I want to talk a little bit about your background, and we'll close it off there. You were originally a journalist, you were a news anchor, and then you told me offline you were doing your own podcast on the side, and then you did this full time. You eventually quit your job, and then you started your own podcast full time. What made you transition into the cryptocurrency space is my question.
Yeah, so I felt like for 10 years, I was reporting on just a more and more divided nation. And all of the stories had basically, it was the same core frustration of that feeling of being left behind. And I would report on increasing poverty, increasing homelessness, public corruption, civil unrest. And it was like the country was breaking apart. And I saw the disintegration of the American dream that my parents came here for. And I kept wondering, what is causing this? Like, why is this happening? We're in the United States. We're supposed superpower of the world where everything is possible if you just work hard, and everything was getting harder and harder. And each politician would come in saying, I'm the solution. That guy's the problem. Let me spend more money. And it was Bitcoin, when I discovered it in 2017, that led me down the path of truly understanding our monetary system, of understanding the history of fiat, the history of when we went off the gold standard, the history of the Federal Reserve, what money printing is and how it benefits the few. And it really hurts the majority of the people in this country. And I became very passionate about it. I felt like I want to hold people accountable in government. That's why I wanted to become a reporter. Well, now I want to educate the public on not only the problem, but that there's a fix. It's based on technology. I know it's hard for some people to grasp because it's not technically physical, but it's pristine math. It's an incredibly powerful network. It's based on decentralization and scarcity, and it can fix so many of the problems we're facing. And it offers us this path toward hope. And that's why I wanted to leave my job, because ultimately I feel like I'm helping the world. And I didn't necessarily feel that way anymore in my previous career.
And we didn't mention, but a lot of people, especially in the developing world, they're underbanked, they're unbanked actually, and they don't have bank accounts. And people are saying that cryptocurrencies are now the solution to people accessing financial capital, whereas they didn't have that access before. Is that something, that a sentiment you share?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually had a woman on my podcast who was incredibly inspiring to me, Roya Mahboob. She's one of the first female tech CEOs of Afghanistan. She started paying the women that worked for her in Bitcoin many years ago. And a lot of them are doing well off as a result of that investment. But what's crazy is when the Taliban took over, Bitcoin was basically an escape route to get out of Afghanistan. When the banks were shut down, when there was a run on the banks, I mean, Bitcoin, again, is helping people in real time to be able to escape oppressive governments and to be able to transact value from one place to another without any third parties. I mean, it's an incredible network. I'm so excited about what's happening globally as a medium of exchange. I'm excited about what's happening here as a store of value and as a savings technology. And I can't wait to see what happens next with Bitcoin.
Final question. When Bitcoin reaches $1 million, where will you be?
I'll probably be on a boat in Italy, really celebrating. Hoping not to lose my keys. Don't lose your keys, Natalie, whatever you do, because that boat's gonna sink real quick, figuratively and literally. All right, well, you've got that figured out, I'm sure. Natalie, thank you so much for coming on the show. Excellent insights. I look forward to having you again. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Kitco News. Natalie, where can we find more of your work before we let you go?
Sure. So I host Coin Stories. That podcast is on YouTube, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, all of it. And I'm also on Twitter at Nat Brunell.
Excellent. All right. Thanks for watching the show. Stay tuned for more.